Jim wanted to go over and ask the man what was going on, but his girlfriend Grace immediately stopped him. She felt that this place was extremely remote, and with heavy rain pouring outside, no ordinary person would just stand in the middle of the road. At that moment, the man started walking toward them. Jim still wanted to get out and ask, but Grace reminded him again.
Just call somebody for help, okay? Let's go. I don't want to pick up a stranger out here.
Unable to resist his girlfriend's insistence, Jim decided to drive away first. But just then, the car wouldn't start no matter what he did. As the man got closer to their car, the engine finally roared to life, and Jim slammed on the gas to speed away. But their nightmare was only just beginning. Still uneasy about the man, Jim tried to call for help, but there was no signal in this area, so they had no choice but to keep moving. When they arrived at a service station to refuel, a truck slowly pulled in, and out stepped the same man who had tried to stop them on the road, John. Jim awkwardly turned away to avoid eye contact. Later, they met again at the front desk. Jim apologized for what had happened earlier, and John said he understood. At that moment, Grace walked over.
This is the guy we almost hit. We can't get a tow until morning, so I told him we could give him a ride to the motel.
Without consulting his girlfriend, Jim agreed to give John a ride, and so the three of them hit the road together. But it wasn't long before John showed his true colors. He leered up and down at Grace.
She's a good-looking girl.
Thank you.
How long you been fucking her?
Excuse me?
It's a simple question.
Grace, wearing headphones, didn't hear their conversation. Jim glanced at the ring on Grace's finger.
How long you been fucking your wife?
I don't have one.
Well, what's with the wedding ring, man?
Hope strangers think I'm trustworthy.
Then John picked up Jim's phone.
Aren't you?
Jim, furious, prepared to pull over and kick him out, but John suddenly pulled out a knife and threatened him not to stop the car. Seeing the situation, Grace secretly tried to call the police. Suddenly, John grabbed Grace and warned Jim that if he obeyed, no one would get hurt. He then pressed the knife against Jim's neck. Jim pretended to agree while slowly accelerating. At a critical moment, Jim slammed on the brakes, throwing John against the windshield. Together, Jim and Grace managed to kick the still dazed John out of the car. John rolled several times before coming to a stop. They were lucky to escape unscathed. Jim comforted his girlfriend, saying, "It's over," while Grace tried to call the police again, only to find her phone had fallen out with John. They had no choice but to speed away from the danger. After driving for who knows how long, their emotions finally calmed down, and Grace fell asleep in the passenger seat. Jim, also exhausted, pulled off onto a side ramp to rest. It turned out everything felt like just a nightmare. By now, it was early morning. Still shaken from last night's horror, they decided to report to the police at the next town. They continued on their way. A car carrying a family of 4 drove past them. Seeing the cute kids in the car, Jim and Grace started planning how many children they might want in the future. But to their shock, John appeared inside the family's car, glaring fiercely at them. Jim, worried for the family's safety, sped up to try to warn them. But because their car was moving too fast, the family couldn't hear anything Jim said. Suddenly, a large truck approached from the front. In a panic, Jim swerved hard to avoid it. But this time, they weren't so lucky. The family's car disappeared from view, and there was nothing Jim could do. Meanwhile, their own car was now totaled. They had no choice but to continue on foot. They tried flagging down passing vehicles but were completely ignored. Soon, they found the family's car. Jim approached to check it out, only to find the entire family had been slaughtered. It was clearly John's doing. Suddenly, a bloody hand reached out. It turned out the man inside was still barely alive. Jim and Grace immediately rushed to find help. But not long after, the deranged John appeared again, this time driving a stolen car. He started ramming into them furiously. But strangely, John didn't seem intent on killing them immediately. After a few collisions, he swerved off onto another road. Having shaken off John, Jim and Grace finally reached a small town. Grace asked the attendant to call the police while she grabbed tissues to stop the wounded man's bleeding. But when she turned around, she spotted John's car parked outside. At that moment, someone approached the restroom door. Fearing it might be John, Grace quickly locked the door. When no more noise came from outside, Grace cautiously stepped out. The police immediately treated the two as murder suspects and arrested them. Helpless, they had no choice but to be taken away by the police. But in a way, this was good. They were at least safe in the police station, and as long as they explained everything clearly, there shouldn't be any problem. However, things soon spiraled out of control. Not long after, a bloody hand started drawing on the glass. John had not only broken into the police station, but had also killed all the officers inside. When John heard Jim making a commotion,
Why are you doing this?
it was clear that he just wanted to toy with them. Meanwhile, Grace, after waiting a long time without any officers arriving, decided to go out and check. To her horror, she was met with a scene full of corpses. The sight was shocking. To protect herself, she quickly grabbed a handgun and ventured into the dark jail area, successfully rescuing Jim from his cell. However, just as they thought they were safe, a large group of police officers arrived at the scene. To escape arrest and being hunted, the two fled desperately along a mountain path. Grace, running ahead, didn't notice a car falling from the sky, narrowly missing her and nearly crushing her into pieces. Jim quickly looked up, but saw no one around. With no other choice, they had to find another escape route. Meanwhile, the sheriff who had arrived at the scene carefully inspected everything. After verifying their information, he keenly realized that these two college students couldn't possibly have caused all this carnage. He concluded that there must be a third person involved, most likely the real killer. On the other side, Grace and Jim fled to an abandoned bus station. Unexpectedly, John had followed them. They hurriedly hid inside the building to lay low. At that moment, a police car arrived. In a desperate attempt to seek protection, Jim tried to explain everything to the police, but was immediately tackled and arrested. Seeing this, Grace rushed out with her gun to rescue Jim, but in the next second, a hidden John shot and killed the police officer. This scene was witnessed by another approaching officer, making Grace and Jim unable to defend themselves. They had no choice but to steal a police car and escape. The sheriff quickly called for aerial support, and 3 police cars pursued them closely. The two were now trapped under a massive manhunt with no way out. In panic, Grace opened the radio to try and explain to the police. The sheriff demanded that they pull over for inspection, but Grace told him that the real murderer was nearby and they didn't dare stop. Infuriated, the sheriff ordered his men to force them to stop. While the police were focusing intently on the fleeing car, John suddenly charged at them at high speed in another vehicle. Caught off guard, the police were thrown into chaos. Soon, 3 police cars were crashed into one after another, and even the helicopter was hit and crashed on the spot. At this point, Jim and Grace were like lambs waiting for slaughter. But unexpectedly, John only glanced at them before speeding away from the scene. The two had no idea what he was planning. Their car was completely wrecked, so they had no choice but to continue fleeing on foot along the mountain road. Night fell. They found a roadside motel. Penniless, the two sneaked into a guest room. After settling Grace down, Jim went outside to call for help. Exhausted from a full day of fleeing, Grace quickly fell into a deep sleep. In a half-dream, half-awake state, a hand reached inside. She groggily saw the cake on the table, thinking Jim had returned. Suddenly, she was pinned down on the bed. John had reappeared. In the struggle, Grace bit his wrist hard. John responded with a heavy slap. Grace grabbed the bedside phone and smashed it at him. Finally, she managed to break free with the help of a table lamp and quickly fled into the bathroom. After making sure it was quiet outside, Grace cautiously exited the room, searching for Jim. She called his name everywhere, only to stumble upon a horrifying scene. To her shock, she found John had chained Jim between 2 cars. The vehicles were starting, the chain tightening, and Jim screamed in agony. Grace pointed a gun at John and ordered him to stop the cars, but John threatened her. If she shot him, the clutch would release, tearing Jim apart. Helpless, Grace was forced to get into the car and plead with him, but John remained unmoved. At that moment, a large number of police officers arrived. More than a dozen guns were aimed at John, but he showed no fear. In the end, he started the cars, brutally tearing Jim apart. John was immediately arrested by the police, but after an investigation, the sheriff informed Grace that John had been missing for over a week. This man had no fingerprints, no identity records. He needed to be sent to a higher authority for further investigation. As the main witness, Grace would also need to provide testimony. 2 vehicles drove along a country road, but no one could have expected what happened next. Inside the car, the cruel man expressionlessly broke his own thumb, freeing himself from the handcuffs. He He then used the handcuffs to slit the throat of the officer sitting in front of him. By the time the other officers noticed something was wrong, it was already too late. Another officer was killed on the spot, causing the vehicle to overturn. At that moment, the sheriff's car failed to brake in time and collided with the vehicle in front of it. His leg got trapped, and he couldn't move. Grace grabbed the sheriff's handgun, intending to avenge Jim. The sheriff tried to persuade her not to act recklessly, but Grace couldn't hear a single word he said. The moment she opened the door, she was overpowered. The gun was taken away from her, and she was locked into the trunk. Spilled gasoline covered the ground, and the man fired a shot to ignite it before turning to walk toward the sheriff. Just then, the car exploded violently. At the critical moment, Grace found a shotgun inside the trunk and burst out. But even so, she could only watch helplessly as the sheriff was killed. Thinking that Grace didn't dare to shoot, the man casually turned and walked away. But after everything she had endured, Grace was no longer the same. She fired several shots, crippling him. Finally, with one last shot, she blew his head off, bringing the story to an end.